And I'm honored today to be here with Victoria Washington, who is one of the people who inspires me the most when I come and think about this time of year and how to tackle the hard and complicated issues around forgiveness. Victoria lives in Arizona with her daughters, and she started off her career in Ferguson, Missouri as a police officer and has been a defense attorney for many years, including working with people on death row, defending people on death row. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And Victoria, is there anything you want to add to by way of introduction?
I was raised in Ferguson. My police career started in Columbia, but there is that Ferguson connection because that's where I was raised and ran the streets literally in preparation for my police academy examination process, literally jogging through the streets of Ferguson. So everybody knew me, my family. It was a good time.
It was a good time. Well, I want to jump right in and ask you about this particular time of year in general, and maybe also what it is about this year, because the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, between the New Year and the Day of Judgment, for Jews is such an intense time. And I'm curious what that time means to you. And yeah.
Well, it's a deeper time, and it's deeper because it's a personal reflection. The themes of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah I deal with 24/7, 365 in my work. And so this time period is the ability for me to step outside of that and work on myself. And so I use this period for renewal and return to who I was, who I am, who I hope to be. So this time period is a period of personal reflection, because I do professional reflection on forgiveness all of the time.
Okay, well, so that leads me to ask, your professional work on forgiveness usually gets more serious and challenging than most of us get when it comes to forgiveness. And most of us, some of us are dealing with personal forgiveness on really deep levels with real family issues and crises. And I'm just curious, but many of us don't have that much experience. It's all theoretical. Can you tell us about what forgiveness means for you and how you seeing that playing out with criminals and victims in cases with violent crimes, because that's right. I'm right. And that's who you deal with most of the time.
Right. Since 1997, I've been a career defense attorney, but since 2004, the last 16 years, I've only dealt with people who are facing the death penalty or are already on death row, and they're in the post process. But I deal with them mainly on the trial level. And what that means is I meet them at the very beginning of the process, and I'm with them for probably 3 years until we have some sort of resolution, either through trial or a plea. But I deal with people who society has deemed the worst of the worst. And I go to a seminar. It's interesting because the name of the seminar I go to on a yearly basis is called Defense of the Damned. And that's how it's characterized, because of they're accused of doing horrific things, and people assume that that they are damned. And so that's the title of the seminar. And it's only at the time of sentencing that we really get into the nuts and bolts of forgiveness, because it's multi-layered.
Say more about that. I'm not sure I understand.
Well, it's multi-layered because my clients have to do some forgiveness to get to a certain point in their own personal growth and process.
Were they forgiven?
They are forgiving the people that visited harm and trauma upon them. No one is born a killer at all. Not really.
Well, that's
but,
certainly Judaism would frame it.
But life and trauma and circumstances of birth and home and environment have conspired to remove a basic restraint from my clients. And that restraint is, we don't kill people. But something happened to make that restraint disappear. So before we even get to punishment, we have to find out who my client is. How did he get to this point? And sometimes there's so much trauma and hurt that my client is even removed from his family. And so there has to be that level of forgiveness between him and the people that hurt him when he was the most vulnerable. And I say him because I've only represented one woman in the 23 years. And so before we can even begin to work on this case, we have to do some work with him and the family to bridge gaps, abysses, chasms as big as the Grand Canyon, because there has to be a lot of soul searching and forgiveness within that construct before we even get to interacting with the persons he has harmed.
So the people who've committed the crimes or accused of committing the crimes have to be able to forgive those who've hurt them and didn't bring them up in a way that would allow them to be their best selves.
Correct. I mean, my clients have to absorb and revisit sometimes very horrific things done to them, and that they haven't really delved into or thought about. They refuse to blame what happened, and most of the time they are in a position where they are trying to defend the people who hurt them the most, especially if it's a mother figure. I hear it a lot. She did the best she could. You know, there were 9 of us. She was trying to keep a roof over our head. She couldn't be there. She had to stay with this man because there was nowhere else to go. That sort of reconciling the person who was supposed to love and protect him with the failure to do so.
And then you're bringing that layer in. So what are some of the other layers that happen? I mean, because to me, I'm hearing these things, and I'm also thinking about systemic racism and the impact of that when there's abject poverty, when women are not able to get the security that they need to be able to provide for their children, when families are under-resourced, then and we have a legacy of not valuing people's lives if they're not wealthy. so that, and there's also racism. I don't know whether racism, you're talking generally, and I don't know if your clients are, where they are racially. So I know you've defended people of many different backgrounds. So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Well, before they get to my caseload, there are many, many chances to change their trajectory. It's not, they don't go from stealing bubble gum to stabbing their neighbor the next day. There are many chances for intervention. There are many chances for correction. There are many chances for mental health help. There are many chances for substance abuse help. The problem is the system lacks empathy and compassion as a whole, and is punitive oriented. It's not rehabilitative oriented. It's punishment oriented. It's not about changing the trajectory. It's about punishment. It's about money. It's about value.
Tell me more about when you say it's about money. What does that mean?
Prison is a business. It's an industry. Each bed costs something. And, we have a proliferation of private prisons now.
Right.
That is, people own stock in there, in private prisons. If no one is getting sent to prison, nobody's making any money. And so when they say the prison industrial complex, that's exactly what they mean. And we have substance abuse programs, but they don't go far enough. It's like they don't really delve into the why someone needs or takes medication. It's more cognitive, behavioral, when you feel the urge, call your sponsor or whatever, as opposed to why do you need to self-medicate? What are you not confronting when you're high? What are you not looking at? We don't do that component of it. And my clients feel some kind of way. They're like, I hear it over and over again. I never got the help I needed. And there's some bitterness there. And I find it fascinating. We hear stories about children who were rescued from horrific abuse. And we're so empathetic, and we want to provide everything. But when they turn 17 and 16 and that same child has committed a crime, the system that didn't help and protect him when he was 6 now wants to kill him when he's 20. And so there's that comfort, there's that weirdness that we have in America.
Yeah. Well, so how does Judaism help? Like, I would imagine that there are many people who don't want to do the work you're doing. You come in with compassion and with a sense of justice, right? I think you deal with you also have to stand there and are also accountable to the victims and their families. This is not easy work. What I know from our previous conversations, we've talked a little bit about Judaism and the role it plays in helping you find the way to navigate in these situations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I also, because I have my own practice, I have the ability, I have actually represented victims of homicide before, to help them navigate the system in a victim advocate role. and victims of sexual assault to help them navigate in the victim role. So I have the ability to literally see both sides of the aisle from different perspectives. And I think what happens with me is I live my life Jewishly. And what I mean by that is my sense of justice is to do what's good and right, because doing what's good and right is its own reward, if that makes sense. I'm very, very wedded to the idea of mitzvot and tikkun olam as very important to me. And I view what I do as...
What are mitzvot are commandments, positive good deeds, and tikkun olam is repairing the world. Continue.
And that's what I see my whole body of work is repairing the world, one client or one victim at a time, because I also believe in the concept of restorative justice. And what that is it's not reconciliation, not really, but it is allowing the victim to access wherever they are at the time, allowing my client to access, and by access, I mean full access to his or her feelings and the ability to express them in an environment that isn't hostile like at sentencing. And that's important because there's no such thing as closure. And what I have found, especially in terms of forgiveness and where a victim lands on the scale, the other important part of it is remorse. And remorse because you have done harm, not remorse because you've gotten caught. And it's hard for victims to hold on to hatred when someone is actually crying out for forgiveness. When you say, I will never forgive you, that only matters to the person who is truly remorseful. And it's hard to say, I will never forgive you, to the person who's truly sorry and remorseful.
Well, that sounds like a very Jewish piece as well. I mean, I think that fits in very well with the idea of repentance and restoration and renewal that exists in Judaism, right? That we have to ask for forgiveness, and doing that means doing that internal work, what that you're talking about at the beginning about what this period means. We have to do that internal work. We have to see where we have been. We're going to have to give forgiveness to others, and then we have to ask forgiveness from others. And our tradition says you have to ask forgiveness 3 times. And like on some level, that, you know, that ends up being what it is. You know, Ali, we had a question here from Ali Medoff, and she said, how do we forgive those who show no remorse or regret for their actions? Is forgiveness for us or for the person we are forgiving, or both?
Yeah, I would say for us. And I say that because right now I'm representing a victim, 3 victims actually, of one sexual predator. And we're going to proceed to sentencing. And in reading letters from the victims to the court, one letter stood out because the person said, I will hate you forever. And I flinched when I read that, because that's not my client she's going to hate. I'm representing the person who is doing the hating. And I flinched when I read it because we've heard the term living rent-free in your head, right? He has no remorse, period. None, zero, zilch. So her hatred of him has no effect on him at all because he doesn't care that he caused harm. So she's carrying this load of negative energy that will weigh her down. And he's sleeping peacefully because he doesn't think he did anything wrong. He doesn't care. And so that's why I say it's really for us, because he's not losing any sleep whatsoever. But she's going to be losing sleep. And she's going to be stuck in a cycle. And until that burden can lift bit by bit, she's sucked in a hole. And it's going to weigh on her soul. And so I think forgiveness really is for us because it allows us to let the system do what it needs to do without our constant vigilance and our constant pouring of energy into it.
So what would you say to how do you, in your own experiences, both watching people through time, when we have that level of anger and we're not ready to forgive, what would you recommend to us? Because I think that this is one of the places where a lot of us get stuck. On some level, sometimes it feels more comfortable to be angry and to hate someone than it does to forgive them. So talk to me about what advice do you have for those of us who are struggling with letting go and forgiving?
Well, I think it is a question of, do you want to forgive? You have to start there. And you have to have the self-authenticity to say yes or no, or I'm not there yet. And then you have to be able to ask the next question. Do you want to forgive? No, I don't. Why not? And that's when you start getting into the bare bones, when you start answering those questions. Most of the time, it's because they feel that they're betraying the person that was hurt by moving on or forgiving. Or they have their own guilt associated with what happened, failure to protect, or I didn't believe them when they told me what happened. Whatever surrounds that, they have to ask the first question, do I want to?
Is forgiving the same thing in your mind as forgetting or not holding people accountable? Or are they different? No? Talk to me more about that.
Forgiving doesn't mean I absolve you. And it doesn't mean that you should not have consequences. There's a difference between, in my mind, consequences and punishment, because punishment and reward is a consequence. That's what a consequence is. They're either good consequences or bad. We always associate a consequence with punishment, but reward is also a consequence. And so I think people forget or say, just I forgive you, that means you still have to suffer the consequences of your behavior, what that is. Forgiving means I am not going to continue telling the court or whomever what that consequence or punishment needs to be. I am willing to surrender control over what happens to you. That's what it means to me.
Oh, I know, and this is hitting me really hard given what we've seen this week with the courts in the Breonna Taylor case. I mean, that's really hitting me very hard to say, to surrender to what the courts are going to do. And here they didn't hold people accountable for, how do I make sense of that when the system doesn't seem to be built fairly in the first place? How do we navigate that? Do we say, look, this is the best system we have? You know, how do you navigate that? How do you see that?
Well, I always say that the system wasn't built, it wasn't meant for African descendant of slaves. The system was put in place to keep us in slavery. That's why police departments were formed. They were slave catchers. So the system wasn't meant for us. We are trying to work within the construct of a system that is currently in place. The consequence of the system that we have is the injustices we see. So the question is not whether we forgive the system. The question is, how do we affect the system? It's not a matter of forgiveness or surrender. It's a matter of, now I want to affect the system. It's not I want to control it. I want to affect it. I want to make changes in the system, whether it's abolishment, defund, remake it, burn it down. But it is, I want to make a change in the system. Forgiveness is not even a part of the conversation in this particular case, because the forgiveness is not the system. The forgiveness belongs between the Taylor family and the officers that killed their loved ones. The system is a byproduct, but forgiveness is a personal thing.
So on some level, forgiveness can only work if the system itself is really working and is just, right? Like in Judaism, we think of justice as being sort of wholeness. And if it's really wholeness, then there's space for forgiveness. But when it's not whole, it's harder to get to that place.
It's harder to get to that place because that other component is missing. Remorse. There's no remorse there. And so again, you're holding negative energy for a system that doesn't care.
Right, and I think that I keep coming back to this idea of your explanation of remorse and forgiveness, like that the first level is this personal introspection. And if you can't do that, you're not even going to get to those more complicated layers, right? So the sexual assault offender has no remorse, there's no space, then that creates, that breaks the possibility of that forgiveness. Right? And that's also what Judaism says, is you have to do the work and go and ask for the forgiveness, acknowledge and see where you've done wrong before you can really expect someone to forgive you. And yet at the same time, people who, like on some level, the forgiveness has to come from the other person anyway for their own sake. It's really complicated, messy stuff. In your personal life, are these issues that you've also dealt with personally?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's sometimes you don't have the opportunity to forgive, and sometimes you do. I don't mind sharing that I have a younger brother. He and I have been out of contact for a number of years, and he reached out recently. And I'm his older sister by 14 years. And you know, he wasn't necessarily the black sheep of the family. He's just a kid who screwed up a lot, a whole lot. And he stayed away out of shame. And he reached out to me, not knowing if I would reach back. And, you know, I was able to tell him, I have always loved you. The thing is, none of the offenses he was ashamed of were perpetrated against me. You know, you burglarized somebody else's stuff. You stole somebody else's stuff. You know, you broke into somebody else's house or whatever. But none of the offenses were against me. But if they were, I've always put people before things. I don't care if you steal my car. What that means is I will hide my keys from you, but not my love. You know, so he came to ask forgiveness. And I had to say, you know, I'm not exactly sure what you want forgiveness for, because you never hurt me. You only hurt yourself. But to the extent that you think you need forgiveness, I will not withhold that. I love you. I always have. I always will. And I just wrote him like 2 days ago talking about the days of awe. I said, you know what? I'm 14 years older than you. If I have failed you, and my failure to do something put you on the trajectory that led you astray, please forgive me. Because even though we say intention doesn't matter, I never intended harm. But if I did, and that's how you ended up, please forgive me.
I think that when I hear you say that, one of the things that I hold precious about about the Jewish liturgy, about forgiveness, is we don't say, you know, I have sinned. We say we have sinned, right? Like, you're talking about your brother's challenges, and here you are taking your own responsibility in that process. And I think about that also in this moment where we're seeing more white Americans being more aware of the ways systemic racism and the systems of justice or injustice work. I think that what have we all done to create this system that is causing these situations that we can't like we should be asking forgiveness for our role, all of us, in allowing the system to be perpetuating and not putting people at the center, and not seeing the holiness of Black lives, seeing them as dispensable or warehousable in prisons. And I think that when I hear you talking about that, it's, as Ilana Rossoff wrote, it's very powerful. I think it is. I'm choked up because I think it's also a reminder to me about how much more I need to be doing. Each of us, but all of us collectively need to be doing to make the systems work.
Well, I think, you know, one of the important things in this time period is, you know, sometimes we don't know we've harmed someone until and unless they tell us. When they do that, all of us have a duty to listen and acknowledge it, and not play it off and say, well, you know what, I didn't intend to, but I'm sorry if I hurt you. You know, and so I think when we say, you know what, This is, and this is a time. I usually do it at the beginning, after Rosh Hashanah, and say, this is a time of reflection. I may have hurt some of you. I did not intend to it, and I don't know that I've hurt you unless you tell me. So if I have hurt you, please contact me and let me know how, so that I can start to talk to you about it. I won't make excuses. I'll listen to what you have to say, and I'll try to figure out, because once you know better, you do better. And I can't apologize for harm until I know it and recognize it, because part of an apology is the commitment to do better.
Well, and the other piece that I hear in that is part of an apology is the commitment to stay in relationship even when it's difficult.
Well, sometimes.
Feel free to disagree.
Sometimes, because there's the other important part is being able to establish a boundary. Because forgiveness and remorse doesn't necessarily mean staying in relationship with dysfunction and toxicity. There has to be a boundary, because if the person says, you harmed me by walking away from me and never speaking to me again, then you have to be able to say, that's the boundary I have to set, because X was harmful to me. Staying in relationship is harmful to me. So you have to be able to listen and know how, where, when, and what boundaries to forgiveness, repentance, remorse, staying in relationship, what boundaries need to be set so that you're healthy.
I think that especially for women who've been taught to please, that's a really important thing to remember. We do not have to solve everybody else's problems.
True.
And that is not something that the male rabbis of our rabbinic texts wrote into our liturgy. I think that that's wisdom that Rabbi Victoria Washington can add our Yom Kippur thing. So I have two last. We're getting to the end. If there's anybody who has questions from our audience today, we'd love to hear from you. But is there anything that you hope those connected with the Jewish community should be thinking about at this moment?
Well, yeah, I actually, one of the things that I've seen play out is a deliberate division between Jews and African Americans, Blacks, and Black Jews. And I think it's a deliberately fostered division. We forget that at some point we all came out of bondage. Some came out of bondage in Egypt, some came out of bondage in the Deep South, separated by eons. But we were all held in captivity. And we were all systemically cut off from our support system and our source. And we have to recognize when we are being deliberately pitted against each other. And then we also have to recognize our own internal biases. Someone asked me whether I would consider making Aliyah to Israel. And I said, I know it's supposed to be a place where Jews can go. But I also know that people that look like me aren't welcome in Israel. And it's not even because I'm a Reformed Jew. It's not even because I'm a woman. But I know and I understand there's a deep-seated anti-Blackness there. And Israel is not a place for people that look like me, even though I'm a Jew. It's not a place that I can return to and be safe. And Lord knows if I add the Reform part, or even, Sephardic, then I'm at a double loss or in a double bind. And so I think we have to work harder in understanding that every Jew is not Ashkenazi. And to make our spaces welcome.
I think that that's one of the places where the Jewish community has a lot of repentance and work towards restoration. That we haven't done the soul searching. We haven't asked for forgiveness, and we haven't really sought to make the changes. I think we have a lot of work. I couldn't agree with you more. We have a lot of work to do there. So I always like to end on a positive. Maybe you could just, these are not easy times, but you are a person who I know finds hope and holiness in always, and inspiration. You're a source of inspiration every time we connect. So where are you finding hope and holiness these days?
I'm finding hope and holiness in pretty much everyone under the age of 18.
Why? Why there?
Because that group between, let's say, 13 and I'll even go as far as 21 are full of love and compassion, just full of it. And they are full of passion, and they have a firm sense of what is right and good and wrong, and are willing to speak truth to the power, to their parents, to their teachers, to me. My kids get on me all the time. And so, it's in the little things that they do that show me, and I don't mean just my kids, I mean kids as a whole, their ideas of, let's do this, let's make a book drive, let's put packages together to give away, during the winter, let's put socks and granola bars and whatever. The kids are coming to the forefront of change. They're not accepting. When they're 13 and 14 and they wrap their arms around their transgender classmates and accept them and love them and fight for them and are there for them. When I was that age, kids who were different were, you know, shunted off to the side. But, you know, when they take their trays and go sit with someone that just looks lonely, that's where my hope is. I don't put much hope in adults because we have too much to lose sometimes, and that constrains our willingness to stand next to someone, it constrains our willingness to live or die by our principles. These kids, they have zero cares to give. There's another word they use, but they have zero cares to give, and so they're willing to speak truth to the power. And that's a beautiful thing. That's the hopeful thing, because that's all we have right now.
Well, I'm really grateful for you taking this time to talk with us today. I think that this has been a really interesting conversation, as always. I encourage people to go to globaljews.org and take a look at some of the pieces that Victoria has written about forgiveness and her own family life and her own experiences, even more material. And I go back and read those pieces every year at this time because they help me be the better version of myself. And I think that that's what I've learned. I've learned so much from you today. So thank you on behalf of B'chol Lashon, and thank you to OneTable for hosting us. So I say to you, Gmar Chatima Tova, may we all be written in the book of long and good and healthy life. And may we all finish out this, this period with intention and well. So Gmar Chatima Tova and Shabbat Shalom. Zoe.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.